It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the sports podcast owner of Tip of the Ice-Berg, a Pittsburgh Penguins podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to start a sports team fan podcast?
It kind of started in college where my co-host and we were both majors in that field and we wanted to talk a little bit more. And luckily enough, we had a radio station at our college that just basically gave you gave you a radio show if you wanted one and if you presented a good idea. So we had the idea to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins just due to our mutual love of the team and love of the sport of hockey as well. So it all started with a radio show that then eventually turned into what you see today as the Tip of the Ice-Berg podcast.
What was the transition like from being a radio show to a podcast?
Surprisingly enough, it was not that difficult, especially because when we were doing the radio show, I would, in my editing, also turn it into a podcast. But the only difference really is it's not live if you don't want it to be. There are times that we go live on Twitter, on Facebook Live, but if we don't want it to be live, that's the biggest difference. We don't have to worry about being live and we can actually go back and edit some stuff. I try not to edit as much as possible to make it have the kind of appearance of a radio show because that's where both my co-host Nick and I's roots are. So we want to try to keep to that. But the podcast, you do have the benefit of the doubt of getting to go back and change some things up if you want to.
How did you come up with the name of your podcast, The Tip of the Ice-Berg?
That's actually a pretty funny story. I did not come up with that. The network that we're on, the Hockey Podcast Network, when they initially asked us to cover the Penguins for them, the title that they had was the Tip of the Iceberg. And they said, you know what, you can change that if you want. We get that it's not yours. And I personally love it. I fell in love with it the second that they kind of showed it to us. And I said, no, I'm not changing a thing. I love it. I'm going to roll with it. And that's what we've done. So I can't take any credit for the genius of the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, but as far as the naming goes, but as far as the content goes, I'll take as much as I possibly can be, along with, I've mentioned him a couple times, my co-host, Nick Horwat.
Of course, before you joined the hockey podcast, were you already a fan of the Pittsburgh Penguins, or was it like they needed a Penguins podcast, so you just became a fan to cover it more?
I've been a fan of the Penguins as long as I can remember. When I was growing up, my dad would turn on the game on the TV and mute it and have me listen to Mike Lang, which is also where my love for broadcasting came out. So just to watch those teams, even those really bad teams in 2003, 2004, when I was really young, I've always been a fan of the Penguins, and I've always wanted to cover the Pittsburgh Penguins. Whenever the network, the Hockey Podcast Network, first came to me, they wanted us to cover the Ducks because they needed somebody to fill in there. But luckily, right before the season started, well, their Pens host fell out. So we had the opportunity to jump in and really cover a team that we both have a deep love for and deep passion for.
What is it like talking about the Pittsburgh Penguins every day?
It's very great. I love talking about the Penguins, and it's fun because when you do something you love, and for me, talking hockey overall is something I love. Talking Penguins is just another level of that. So being able to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins, it's not work to me. I get to sit down with one of my best friends in the world, and we get to sit there and bullshit about the Pittsburgh Penguins for an hour and a half. And to have people actually want to tune into that, to have people actually agree with my opinions, is just another level. So I appreciate anybody that tunes in, and I appreciate anybody that cares what this guy says right here, because I just have the greatest time sitting there talking, and to be able to bring it to other people and to bring enjoyment to them. It's what it's all about. And it's a great experience.
What are some of the topics that you talk about on the Tip of the Iceberg?
We cover the day-to-day about the Pittsburgh Penguins, as well as some overarching storylines that sometimes we like to delve into Penguins history because we like to think of ourselves as Pens historians, although we're not that old. We do like to delve back deep in and try to get some of the history in there. But we also have a weekly Pens poll that we put out on Twitter. So we get our listeners' reactions and we kind of base our discussion off of that once a week. We have a shout out and call out segment where if something makes us mad or something makes us happy in the week, that's what we bring out, whether that's hockey or it can be something like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. It can be literally anything. That's a catch-all. So sometimes we like to stray a little bit from the Pittsburgh Penguins, but the nuts and bolts of it is about the team and the day-to-day of the team. And even in the offseason, we like to talk about Penn's history, we talk about where the team can go. So we really focus it around the team, but it's much more than that.
What is it like being a part of the Hockey Podcast Network?
Oh, I mean, do we have enough time on here? I'm just kidding. No, the network it's been one of the greatest things I could ever imagine. I would have never have guessed whenever I started with the Hockey Podcast Network when they reached out to me, the just network of friends. It's not even colleagues. They're friends that I have now from across the country. And yes, having the podcast has opened up to a lot of friends on social media from the Penguins perspective, but the network itself, just to be able to sit down and talk to some of these guys, a lot of these guys and girls are extremely intelligent and have such great hockey knowledge to be able to sit down and just bounce ideas off of each other. It has been truly a blessing to be part of this network, and it's a fantastic network of shows, and it's still expanding. So the fact that we even get to bring more people into our family is absolutely tremendous. So I can't say enough good things about the Hockey Podcast Network.
Who are some of the guests that you've had on your show?
We kind of had a wide variety. We've had a couple ex-NHLers in Brad Lieb and Doug Bodger. Doug Bodger, of course, being a former first-round pick of the Pittsburgh Penguins back in the 80s. We've also had some writers. Jesse Marshall went to the same college as me in Horwat, so getting him on was a great time. We have Steve Mears that joined us, who is the play-by-play announcer for the Penguins. And we've also had some guys from the network a lot, too. So we've had guys from the network. We've had another writer, Brian Metzer, was just recently joined. He was a great guest. So we kind of try to space it out and try to bring on different voices from the hockey world and from Penguins Twitter and the Penguins world as well. So we're looking to do a little bit more, but as always, we like to just bring as many different perspectives of the sport and as the team as possible.
How do you go about getting, of course, the people that work with the Penguins on your podcast?
A lot of it is just reaching out and hoping for the best. I'm still at the point where I don't understand why people even want to talk to me. So whenever I get somebody that says, "Yeah, I'll come on your show," I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome!" Like I'm so happy because I still have that mindset of, "Oh, little old me. I'm just sitting here talking about a sport." And to have a guy like Steve Mears be able to come on and share some stories, to have a guy like Doug Bodger talk about coming into the league with Mario Lemieux, just to be able to talk to these guys, it's absolutely fantastic experience. And as far as getting them on the show, it literally is just try to find a contact information, reach out to them, and hope for the best, and really hope that you hear back. And once you do, it is one of the greatest feelings of all time.
What are some of your future plans with the tip of the iceberg?
We've done a pretty good job over the past year of staying consistent and trying to bring out 2 episodes a week during the season, 1 episode a week during the off season. But what we're going to try to do is probably keep that consistency. And another big thing, you mentioned it earlier, is just guests. We're trying to bring on more guests, trying to get some more ex-players, some more ex-Penguins. I mean, if we can get any current Penguins, that would be even better. But just players, radio hosts from Pittsburgh, commentators, anything. We're trying to get a lot of different perspectives and just provide as much information, try to spread the love of the Pittsburgh Penguins and spread the love of hockey throughout Pennsylvania as well as the entire Eastern Seaboard. And basically the entire country. We just want to grow the sport. And if we have any hand in doing that, then I'll consider us very successful.
That's so amazing. What advice would you give upcoming future sports talk podcasts that are looking to start their own sports team podcasts?
My best advice is just get started. That's the big thing. For us, I know I mentioned earlier that we started a radio show. We should have realistically started our radio show 2 years earlier, but we didn't, because we never decided to start. But once we got started, we haven't stopped since. It's been now probably 3-4 years that we've been talking hockey together basically every week in front of some sort of microphone, whether that be on a radio station or whether that be on a podcast platform. So the biggest advice I can give for them and anybody that wants to start a podcast is just get started. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what mic you have. It doesn't matter if it's videotaped. It doesn't matter if it sounds professional to start. You will get that, but just start. Get somewhere to start. And once you start, then you can start making the tweaks. Then you can get the good microphone, get the good editing software, learn how to do that. But it all starts with just getting in front of some kind of microphone, hitting play, and going. That is the biggest thing that biggest advice I can give anybody.
That's amazing. What advice would you give somebody that is looking to get onto the Hockey Podcast Network?
If you're trying to get on the Hockey Podcast Network, the big thing that those guys do is they recognize talent and they also recognize heart. And I'd like to think that that's what they saw in me. I might be blowing smoke up my own hoop, but at the same time, they know who the grinders are. They can tell by going and doing their scouting and going and listening to podcasts. So if you want to get on the Hockey Podcast Network, I'm not going to guarantee you a spot because that's not my job. I unfortunately don't have a decision or a hand in that decision making, but I will say they recognize somebody who is a grinder, somebody who is there to do it and there to put in the work. So if you put in the work, it may not be the Hockey Podcast Network, but it may be another network. It might be somebody else that picks it up. If you're able to put in the work and you're able to show that you have that drive to put in the time and the effort, somebody's going to notice it because you might think nobody's listening. I thought nobody was listening. And all of a sudden I get a text message out of nowhere right before going to a Pens preseason game. So that's the best thing you can do is just grind it out and somebody will notice. I promise you, somebody will notice if you're putting in the work.
That's amazing. Where can my listeners find, of course, your podcast, The Tip of the Ice-Berg, on social media and podcast platforms?
Yeah, you could follow us on social media on both Instagram and Twitter at Ice-Bergh Podcast. And it's spelled Ice-Berg like Pittsburgh. So it's ICEBURGH podcast. You can find us on Facebook as well at Tip of the Ice-Berg Podcast. As far as our podcasts are considered, you can find them basically anywhere you get your podcast from. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, the whole shebang. You can find us basically anywhere you get your podcast from. We have new episodes every Monday and Thursday, usually about an hour to an hour and a half. You don't have to listen to all of it, but I promise you some of it will be worth the listen.
Thank you again, Nick, for your interview, and best of luck in your future with the Tip of the Ice-Berg podcast.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It was great to talk to you.
You too. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brand, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Nick, for your interview, and best of luck with the Tip of the Ice-Berg podcast.
Thank you.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.